I love the 50s because it was a really exciting time to be in the kitchen, and it was a time when things were both functional and good looking, and I think the combination of the two meant that the housewife got these great new gadgets that she could use. And that's why it's very exciting to bring them to life again, and I really enjoy doing that.
Life could be a dream, sweetheart.
This is the place I come for my shopping fix. I love burrowing around and seeing if I can find my favourite things. Even the most perfect 50s housewife wouldn't have had this level of choice. It's like a sort of real time warp experience here, and I love it. I think certainly there are a band of collectors who love to buy 1950s things, and these really set off other pieces that they might have bought, the grander pieces, you know, the really nice armchair or the sofa, something like that. I think there are a number of people like me who buy to use, and you know, if the trend continues, yes, I think we're going to see prices going up. Not too high, I hope, so I can still buy a few things myself. The new materials and new kitchenwares that came out in the 1950s were very revolutionary. Firms like Pyrex had already existed pre-war, but post-war they go in a new direction. They're restyled for a younger audience, and it was the first time, really, they could actually afford modern design. I think I love these things because they're a lot of the things that I actually grew up with. For instance, this was my porridge bowl, not this particular one, but a bowl exactly like this was my porridge bowl when I was about, my first memories of using it about 3 or 4 or something like that. And I don't want to spend fortunes on antiques. I think it's great to spend as much as your small purse can afford, really. And so this sort of stuff at £10 or £12, the perfect buy.
Home cooking, home cooking.
I love the original recipe books and leaflets, which are great, and they kind of just show how perfect you had to be as a housewife. You had to prepare everything so it looked amazing, and then you had to move for the next minute to do some sewing for the children, and then you had to be able to do knitting. So you were sort of multitasking machine that just sort of managed to make it all perfect and produce, you know, the smile at the end of the day.
We ought to bake a sunshine cake. It does more good than a big thick steak.
We'll start.
I start with a tablespoon of trouble.
Then
add a smile and let it bubble.
Well, I think until 1954 things were pretty hard, and the recipes I'm doing today is quite interesting because it's sheer extravagance in terms of what there was. You know, I'm using sausages which were so rarely seen. I mean, you almost had to bribe the butcher to get a sausage. So things changed enormously when rationing ended. And you can see that. I mean, by 1958, we've got recipes that use, goodness knows, 5 or 4 or 5 eggs, and the weekly ration was only 1 egg if you were really lucky. So the whole culture surrounding food changed as the decade progressed, really. Design on tableware was really influenced by what was going on in cookery. And as more exotic food came to the market, factories like Midwinter began decorating their pottery with garlic and red peppers and even asparagus, and these were things that many families had never seen before. These days, saladware designed by Terence Conran commands the really high prices, but personally I prefer to collect more humble and affordable homewares by the likes of designers like Jessie Tate. An average red domino plate would be maybe £8 or £9, but if you're talking about the same plate in saladware, you're talking, you know, certainly £20, £30 or so, something like that. I would love to be able to buy perhaps a really great piece of saladware, but I'm going to have to save up quite hard. Perhaps. I think the 50s values are very much in our minds. It's quite interesting, really, in the times of, I guess, credit crunch, and we're all thinking about how much things cost and, you know, how to save money. Well, you could be a 1950s girl and save money quite nicely because the ingredients, of course, were very fresh. You were using products that didn't have additives or any real E numbers to talk about, and it was a time when you could make things yourself. You know, you were, as a housewife, you would do much more yourself than we do now. And if you can do all of that, it's a tremendous money saver, and I think, you know, let's apply those values today. My friend I think I'm slightly mad, but they don't necessarily share my obsession with the 1950s and 1950s food, but they really enjoy sharing the results. And I'm generally known as the Nigella Lawson of the antiques world amongst my friends. I don't know why. Now I'm going to put my sausage and egg tart, 1950s style, in the oven. And luckily, here's one I made earlier. It looks, I must say, it smells delicious and it looks delicious. There we go. Tea time, anyone? Autograph book. So what's the tale behind this one?
Well, I used to go to Charlton when I was a youngster with my parents. I went from the age of 8 and get the autographs of the players as they came in, including the Manchester United players. Before Munich this was in 1955. You used to go up and take an autograph, please, when you recognised them, you did in those days.
A few years later, disaster strikes, and we have the terrible, terrible Munich air disaster where the majority of the team is killed.
That's right.
Players you'd met.
Terrible. It was a Thursday, I can remember, and when I was coming home from school, my mother was waiting at the door, and she was telling me about it. Oh yes, I can remember it was yesterday. Oh yes, there's Duncan Edwards. He was in the air crash. David Pegg, Roger Byrne. Berry, he was in the air crash as well. And it was very dramatic, that match, the first match afterwards. They played Sheffield Wednesday in the FA Cup, and they didn't know who the team was going to be, and they could sign players from here, there and everywhere they could. And they won 3-0. And by a wave of emotion, they got through to the cup final that year.
It was obviously a very, very poignant time for you, because you kept the newspaper reports.
Oh yes, because it's a memory from that time.
Well, it's also, interestingly, a reasonably valuable memory, because it's an autograph book that's stuffed with all sorts of signatures of footballers and cricketers. So I think in terms of value, around about £600.
No, 600. Just being a youngster and getting autographs.
My earliest memories of childhood has to be travelling on the train, going home from school and trying to get out of the train carriage. Do you remember those moments where you pull down the window, you lean out with your hand, you try to undo the door, and there's a great lock there that's sort of in the way, and then you catch your nail and then slide it along and you're finally out of the train carriage. And that lock was just amazing. It revolutionised, the way people could travel on the trains. And it all begins here.
It was my great-great-great-grandfather who invented the locks, and from that they went on to patent cans, seamless oil can, so I assume they didn't leak. And at one point they were churning out about 12,000 cans a week at the factory in Leeds, which was mainly staffed by women because it was the war. During the war that they had the main productivity. They also did the engage signs on the back of the toilet, so we were brought up as children by our granny telling us your grandfather had something to do with designing the toilet, which we all thought was very funny. And then about 10 years ago I looked into it further and found a whole world of hundreds and hundreds of patents.
Well, what you've opened up is the world of entrepreneurship, haven't you? You've opened up a world of Victorian, great industrial, creativity, really. I mean, this is a man, Joseph Kay, who was your distant relative.
Great-grandfather, who was an orphan, apparently.
Yeah, he was an orphan, and he married reasonably well, which gave him enough funds to be able to think laterally about his skills. And the first thing that he did, which was linked to where we are now in Saltaire, was to develop a mechanism that improved spinning and improved the looms. And from there, he goes on to create a world of different, generally brass, locks and keys and door furniture. Value-wise, what do we say about these? This is just one aspect of his manufacture. The locks can go for into the early hundreds for original K locks, yes. We've got a mixture of the seamless oil cans and the key here. You've got other things at home. They range in price, perhaps 20, 30, 40 pounds a piece.
a little bit more to some collectors, people who are interested in industrial pieces. But it's a world that needs to be added to. You've got such an opportunity. The thing I love about looking at old toys is the fact that you begin to realise the problems that we face today as parents and teachers are just exactly the same as they ever were. And the biggest problem in my household by a long way is sharing. Okay, I just haven't really cracked it. But when you look at a toy like this, a rocking horse like this, you suddenly realise the Victorians cracked it. And didn't they do it well?
Absolutely. One child at each end and one in the middle.
Yeah, perfect. This presumably spends its life in your house, or what's the context?